The rain hadn't let up in hours, and it showed no sign of stopping. Jake Morrison kept his daughter's hand wrapped tight in his as they walked the last few blocks home, her small fingers cold inside his glove. It was nearly midnight on a Friday, the kind of night when everyone else was heading home from dinners and parties, laughing under umbrellas, while Jake was just finishing a 10-hour delivery shift that had left his back aching and his shoes soaked through. 6-year-old Sophie didn't seem to mind the rain. She never did. She hummed something tuneless under her breath, hopping over puddles like they were stepping stones in a game only she could see. 5 years now. 5 years since Megan had passed away and left Jake to figure out, alone, how to be both parents to a little girl who asked him constantly whether her mother could see her from wherever she was. Every day had its own small war in it, the rent, the schedule, the loneliness that crept in after Sophie fell asleep, but somehow he kept getting up the next morning and doing it again. For her, they passed the glass and marble entrance of a hotel Jake could never have afforded to walk into, let alone stay in, and that's when he saw her. A woman sat alone on the curb near the entrance, knees pulled to her chest, a pair of expensive heels discarded beside her like she'd given up on them entirely. Her black suit was the kind that cost more than Jake made in a month, but it didn't matter. Her mascara had run in dark lines down her face, and the doormen and hotel guests walked past her like she was furniture. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down. "Daddy, is she okay?" Sophie whispered, tugging his sleeve. Jake looked around. No friends waiting nearby, no security fussing over her, no one at all. Just a woman who looked like she might slide right off the curb if someone didn't say something. He crouched down near her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She lifted her head slowly, like it weighed more than she could manage, and looked at him with eyes that had clearly been crying for longer than tonight. "Have nobody," she said. Just that. 3 words, barely audible over the rain. It wasn't the voice of someone important. It was the voice Jake recognized from the inside of his own chest on the night Sophie was asleep and the apartment was too quiet. The voice of somebody who had run out of people to call. He didn't think about it for long. He couldn't walk away, not after a voice like that, not after 5 years of knowing exactly what it sounded like to feel utterly alone. So he helped her up, got a cab, and took her home, to his home, the only place he had to offer. He had no idea, climbing into that taxi, that the woman beside him ran one of the largest technology companies in the country. He had even less idea that buried in her past was a secret that connected directly to his late wife, a secret that had stayed hidden for over a decade, waiting. Isabella Sinclair woke to sunlight cutting through an unfamiliar window and the smell of pancakes. For a few groggy seconds, she had no idea where she was. Then it came back in pieces. The gala, the argument with the board, the champagne she'd had too much of, the rain, the curb, the stranger. She sat up fast, pulse climbing, scanning the small room for an exit. That's when a little girl appeared in the doorway, grinning like Isabella was the best surprise of her morning. "Good morning." Isabella blinked. She couldn't remember the last time someone had smiled at her like that. Not a board member angling for a favor, not an assistant managing her mood, just a child who was simply glad to see another person in the kitchen. A moment later Jake came in carrying 2 plates. "Sorry if this is strange," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You weren't really in a state to get home safely on your own." Isabella stared at him. People usually recognized her face within seconds and started performing for her, straightening up, dropping names, fishing for an opening. Jake clearly had no idea who she was. Strangely, she found she liked that more than she expected to. She ate breakfast at a table for 3 in an apartment that could have fit inside her closet, and found she couldn't stop watching the 2 of them. Sophie talked through her whole pancake with her mouth half full, and Jake listened to every word like it was the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. Every joke, every question, every tangent about a cat she'd seen on the way to school. Isabella's own childhood had looked nothing like this. Her father had built an empire and handed it to her instead of his time. Her mother had vanished out of her life sometime in her teenage years, the subject permanently closed, never explained. Achievement had stood in for affection for so long that Isabella had stopped noticing the substitution, until now, sitting in a kitchen that smelled like someone else's lower electric bill, watching a man with nothing give his daughter everything. On her way out, she noticed a photo taped to the fridge, an old one, slightly curled at the edges. A teenage girl stood beside an older woman, both of them laughing at something out of frame. "Who's that with her?" Isabella asked, nodding at it. Jake glanced over. "Megan's mother, I think. Megan never talked about her much. There was some falling out before I knew her. She passed away before I even met Megan." He shrugged, like it was an old, unremarkable sadness. "Funny what people don't tell you, even when you're married to them." Isabella looked at the photo a beat longer than she meant to. Something about the older woman's face nagged at her, but she couldn't place it, and she let it go. She handed Jake a business card instead. His eyes went wide. You're Isabella Sinclair, the CEO." "Guilty," she said, and laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. thanks, not because he'd helped her off a curb, but because for one whole morning, nobody had asked her for anything at all. She told herself the investigation was about gratitude. She wanted to help quietly, pay off a hospital bill, fix a roof, something anonymous, and for that she needed to know more about him. That was the story she told herself anyway. The report came back 2 days later, and it wasn't the financial history or employment record that stopped her cold. It was a single photograph in the file. Jake, younger, standing beside a smiling woman labeled in the caption as his late wife, Megan Morrison. Isabella's breath caught somewhere it didn't come back from easily. The woman's face was unmistakably, impossibly familiar, and it took her several long seconds to understand why. She went home and pulled an old family album off a shelf she hadn't touched in over a decade. She turned pages of a childhood she'd worked hard to stop thinking about until she found it. A photograph from 15 years ago, her mother, younger, smiling, standing next to a teenage girl. The same eyes, the same smile. The fridge photo suddenly made horrible sense. She called her investigator back that night and didn't sleep until he called her with the answer the following afternoon. Megan hadn't simply crossed her family's path by coincidence. Megan was her mother's daughter, born from a relationship before her mother's marriage, kept quiet, kept separate. A chapter of the family closed so thoroughly that Isabella had grown up never knowing it existed, which meant Jake's late wife had been her half-sister, which meant Sophie was her niece. Isabella sat with the phone in her lap for a long time after the call ended, feeling the floor of her entire life rearrange itself. For 38 years she had believed, with total certainty, that she was alone in the world except for people who wanted something from her. Now there was a 6-year-old girl somewhere in the city who shared her blood and didn't know it, who'd grown up without a single relative on her mother's side, and a father who had taken in a stranger on the worst night of her year without asking for a single thing in return. She cried, not from grief, but because for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had something money had never once been able to buy her, a reason to belong somewhere. She didn't call first. She drove to the apartment herself, climbed the stairs, and knocked, rehearsing nothing, because nothing she rehearsed sounded like enough. Jake opened the door in a t-shirt with flour on it, mid-dinner prep, surprised to see her without warning. Isabella, is everything okay? Can I come in? She asked. There's something about Megan I need to tell you. About her mother. She glanced past him, toward the sound of Sophie singing to herself in the next room. About all of us, actually. She told him everything at the kitchen table, the same table she'd eaten pancakes at weeks earlier, sliding the old photographs across to him one at a time so he wouldn't have to take her word for it. She watched the disbelief on his face slowly give way to something gentler. Not just shock, but a strange, aching relief, the kind that comes from learning your daughter isn't quite as alone in the world as you'd feared. She has family, Jake said quietly, more to himself than to Isabella. She has an aunt. She has an aunt, Isabella agreed, and her voice cracked a little on the word, like she was trying the shape of it out for the first time. When Sophie wandered in to see what the grown-ups were being so quiet about, Isabella crouched down to her level the way she'd seen Jake do 100 times, and said the only thing that felt true. Hi, Sophie. I think I'm your aunt. I'd really like to get to know you, if that's all right. Sophie considered this with the serious face of a 6-year-old weighing a major decision, then grinned. Does that mean you'll come for pancakes again? Isabella laughed, the real kind, the kind she hadn't known for years, and said she absolutely would. It didn't fix everything overnight. Grief doesn't work that way, and neither does 38 years of loneliness. But over the months that followed, Sunday breakfasts became a fixture, and then birthdays, and then ordinary Tuesdays for no reason at all. Isabella never stopped being the CEO of a major technology company, and Jake never stopped driving his delivery routes, but neither of them ever had to feel quite as alone in a crowd again. Sophie grew up with an aunt who showed up, which was its own kind of inheritance, worth more than anything in Isabella's accounts. And somewhere in all of it, a woman who once told a stranger on a rainy curb that she had nobody finally understood she'd been wrong. She'd had family all along, she just hadn't found them yet. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Enlightened Stories so more people can discover our channel.